go. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is Sunny Kaercher with Series Greenhouse Solutions, and today I am here in spirit and on the screen with Dan Banks, who is the VP of Cultivation and Production, or Lightshade. Dan and I have known each other for a while and a variety of different roles, and would love to just kick it over to you, Dan, for a little introduction before we dive into our topics today about IPM.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Sunny. Sunny mentioned I'm currently VP of Cultivation and Production with Lightshade, and we are a vertically integrated operator in the Denver area. So we've got 5 cultivation facilities and 10 dispensaries. And then my background is in horticultural science and entomology, which I studied at CSU. And then I've been working in the cannabis industry since 2012. So been in the industry for a while in a number of different roles, and in the current one, on the kind of cultivation side, we've got an IPM team that services all of our facilities, and then the rest of the cultivation roles are all facility specific, but we kind of handle all of those different things in-house. And happy to run through any of those practices or anything else you're interested in.
Yeah, why don't we just start off for anyone that hasn't heard of IPM or is new to horticulture, defining what that acronym is and some of the basic principles.
Sure. So IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management. And if you look it up, you're going to see a lot of different definitions. But I would kind of just generally say that it is a multifaceted and proactive approach to pest management that is grounded in applied ecology. And what that really means is that you have to have a strong awareness and understanding of the biology of your crop, and then also the biology of the organisms that affect it, and then how the environment affects both of those things. And then you use that understanding to kind of break apart the pest life cycles and see, how you can most effectively control them using a variety of different things. And the basis of any IPM program is really scouting. So going out and collecting information about what is present in the crop, what kind of damage might be happening, what those organisms are. And then once you have that, you start to look at controls. And there's kind of a hierarchy of control in IPM. And so we start with things that are really proactive and kind of passive. So the structure of the facility, any sort of barriers to pests that you might have, like sort of greenhouse thrip screening would be a great example, or for more enclosed production, looking at air filtration. And then beyond that, you're also looking at your environmental controls. So how you're able to manipulate the humidity of the environment, the temperature, lighting, all of those things. And then next you get into the cultural practices. And so that's, everything about how you're growing your plants and the techniques you're using throughout cultivation. So your nutritional inputs, your pruning, all of those things. And a great example from the IPM side is pruning really feeds back into things, because if you've got really dense overcrowded canopies, that can create a microclimate that's really enticing to pests. And it can also reduce your ability to do an active control, like say a pesticide spray, because you're not getting good contact. So next up from that cultural side, you also have plant resistance. And so resistant varieties is something that in traditional ag and hort, you see a lot. In cannabis, it's not something that people focus on as much, but from the Lightshade side, as an example, we have a pad wall cooled greenhouse. And so humidity is something that is a challenge for us there, because we don't have mechanical HVAC or mechanical dehumidification. And because we are pad wall cooled, we're putting a lot of humidity into the atmosphere. And then also the plants are transpiring a lot. And so for us, what we've found is that we've done a lot of varietal trialing through there and landed on genetics that are a bit more resistant to botrytis. And then on the cultural management side, for those that still have some issues, we'll actually harvest the tops of the plants around a week to 9 days before the rest of the crop. And what that does is it removes that those really giant big buds that are a great environment for botrytis. And so we kind of use that to control that pest. And then next up, you have biocontrols. And so in cannabis, that's typically using insects and mites that are predators or parasitoids of other insects and mites. And then there's also beneficial nematodes that we could use for soil insect control. And then the last thing you have is compliant and responsible pesticide use. And that's something where, depending on your IPM approach and what you're trying to target, that might look like some routine applications on the vegetative side and then kind of as needed once you get further into flower. Or you might look at, really relying on biocontrols and the other pillars and just using pesticides as needed based off of scouting if you have some sort of an outbreak or something. But that's just kind of a, general high level intro of the various things that are kind of at play there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful. I love how you. So, what are the benefits of implementing a holistic IPM program?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big benefits is that if you're doing it correctly, it can be more economical and more effective than just saying this is a spray schedule and we do this every time. The other thing is that again, if done correctly, it can result in kind of a cleaner product for the end user and safer practices for your employees. So it can be kind of a win-win there. I guess one aspect of IPM that I should mention as well is that part of how the whole technique came about was also an awareness of the environment and how our production is kind of related to that. And so being aware of the things that we can do to reduce our impact, but also this is something that is a little bit less of a concern for like indoor cultivation, but say you're in an outdoor situation, your pest management applications might be reducing natural predators that could be in the crop that might be, buffering you against pests. And so being aware of how to kind of use the environment to your advantage and leverage those things, and then also just reducing your impact. But yeah, I would say for us, the main benefit is that we get more effective control by approaching it this way than if we were to just kind of, hammer on things with pesticide applications. Because with environment, for instance, you can't spray your way out of a bad environment.
Got it. So you had mentioned before scouting and that you have an IPM team across all of your facilities. What is their schedule and their backgrounds? Can you train just anyone to scout as they walk through the greenhouse, or is that a specific role for someone?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So the team that we have 5 different locations, and so the team we have works 5 days a week. 2 days are spent at the greenhouse because it's the largest, and then the other 3 are kind of split through the larger or the smaller 4 locations. And we have them structured so that they're scouting a lot of that time. They're also doing biocontrol applications, and then there's a set period that kind of lines up with the rest of the team's schedule for doing pesticide applications if needed, because you need to have everybody else out of there for that. And as far as the scouting goes, when we're looking for somebody to join the team, having relevant background in horticulture or in cannabis, all of that is very valuable. But at the end of the day, really attention to detail and trainability is huge, because we can provide a lot of the resources on teaching them what the various pests and diseases, the signs and the symptoms look like, and how to go about actually carrying out the scouting. So as long as somebody has, really good attention to detail and just sort of the eye, I guess, it's funny to put it that way, but we call that kind of the eye for just spotting those things in the plants, because a lot of it, even if you don't know exactly what you're looking at, if you're able to identify something is different from normal, and then, take that and then grab somebody that might have a little bit more experience and they can kind of interpret what's going on. That's the really big thing, is just being out there and knowing what you're dealing with and finding things.
Thank you. Like you said, there's a lot of biological interactions at play, and just knowing what your target is probably the first thing that you want to train someone on.
Yeah, you can't, if you don't know what the problem is, you can't solve it. So that's why scouting is such a pillar of that. And conversely, I guess I would mention too, if you're identifying something and it's not a pest, you might put energy and resources into trying to solve a problem that's not a problem. I don't have a picture handy here, but one thing that I reference in relation to that is springtails. They're a little soil-dwelling insect it lives off of decaying organic matter. Not really a pest, it doesn't cause damage, but especially in organic systems, you can see them pop up every now and then. And I've had many cultivators over the years, reach out to me freaking out about these like mystery insects that they're trying to kill. And springtails don't cause a problem. They're also really hard to kill with the type of pesticides and things that are available in cannabis. And so that's a great example of where you can go down a rabbit hole of putting a bunch of resources into something and you don't need to at all.
Yeah. And of course, ironically, the things that you can't see are usually the things that are causing a lot more problems.
Yeah, plant pathogens. I guess when we're talking about like the Lightshade experience over at our greenhouse, we actually have a water recapture system. So all of our irrigation water is captured and then treated and then goes back out to the plants in flower. And so dialing in our kind of remediation techniques and what we're doing to make sure that we're not spreading pathogens was something that took a bit of effort for us because initially the greenhouse was designed with an ozonation system, but it was undersized. And so when we fired up the recirculation system, we were having some pathogen problems. And so we had to diagnose those and change our practices so that we were able to mitigate those issues.
Yeah, and how does that look? Are you doing on-site testing of the effluent or once water
Yeah,
is
so
treated?
we actually have a lab, AL&L labs out in California. That's a great plant pathogen testing lab, and so we can send them water samples, and they're able to, pull a lot from those, and then you can also send them soil or root samples. So we were using them for diagnostic work, and then one of the things that we did as far as a practice change is we inject CHC into so calcium hypochlorite into the water as it's going out. And for us, that's a really good solution because our nutritional system is all synthetic. We're not, we're not like an organic kind of microbe heavy production system. If you were, that solution wouldn't work for you. You'd have to do something else. But that works well for us. And what kind of got me thinking about that whole issue is what you were saying with not seeing it. And sometimes with pathogens, you're not going to see the pathogen, but you will see the sign of it, damaging the plant, whether that's through like wilting because it's taken out the vascular tissue or some sort of like leaf or stem damage. There's a variety of different signs that you might see or symptoms that you might see, I should say, actually, but you're not going to see the pathogen itself.
Yeah, and so you all are at Lightshade. Are you proactively getting samples done for your water and soil and plants, not just when you see a problem, right?
Yeah. So as like kind of an ongoing thing with running that recirculation system, we'll do monthly testing so that we're looking at the pathogen load and seeing if there's problems. And then we also do nutritional testing because when you're recirculating like that, you've got to be aware of what's going on with the nutritional balance as well. And fortunately for us, the consumption rate of water and what the plants are going through is high enough that we've found that when we have that water come back, we treat it and it's sitting in our holding tanks, we can just kind of refresh the balance of that with fresh nutrition. And we're going through enough volume of water that that's not a problem for us. But if we were, using less water and it was coming back multiple times, then we would probably have to do a different nutrient recipe to balance out the things that are preferentially being left behind or taken out by the plants. Because you'll see that like in a recirculating hydroponic system where it's just kind of sitting and you're not losing a lot of water, but the plants are pulling nutrients. You'll end up building up certain things and then lacking others. So you have to be careful with how you refresh those nutrients.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the concentrations of everything really over time.
Yeah, definitely.
That's very cool that you're doing that. It's not only a case for business, but also for sustainability to close the loop as much as possible. And you're really recreating a natural system in a controlled environment.
Yeah, that was something really I'd have to kind of, throw out props to our owner, Steve Brooks, one of the owners of Lightshade, who, when they were putting the greenhouse together, because sustainability is something that he's really kind of pushed for us. That was one of his pushes, was to recirculate. And if you look at the regulatory structure and the cost savings here in Colorado, because water is still relatively cheap and there's not like a regulatory need to do that, it's not really something that we would have done from like an economic standpoint, but it's great that we're doing it from a sustainability standpoint.
I'm wondering if you have a favorite control. You've mentioned cultural and biological controls in IPM. If you have a favorite to implement in a greenhouse growing cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like what you're dealing with is really very much going to depend on. So, in terms of pests and pathogens, that's going to drive a lot of the control measures. But when I'm just thinking about like some of the, biocontrols are fun because you're working with organisms, and so that part of it is always really interesting. So, I guess two that I would give a shout out to are Phytocilius persimilis, which is a little red predatory mite that specializes on spider mites, and it's just really cool to work with because they are really fast moving little mites, and when you're putting them out, it's just like this red blob is like scattering out, and they're running all over the place, and they're voracious predators. They're not good for any other pest. They're just spider mite specific, but they can be really great in an IPM program for kind of breaking the spider mite life cycle, because Persimilis, it likes things warm, as do spider mites, but it likes them very humid, whereas spider mites thrive when things are dry. And so one of the things that I've seen people struggle a lot with when they're breaking the cycle of a spider mite infestation is they will have their mother plants are infested. They take clones, and then those clones tend to come out of the clone dome or cloning situation with a huge spider mite problem, because people are often really hesitant to use control measures on clones because they can be really sensitive. Well, loading up those clone domes with Persimilis, they do a fantastic job of just cleaning up those problems. They can also be good for, really big mother plants with dense canopies. And then they're good for spot treatment as well. When you're dealing with spider mites, I like kind of a hybrid approach, because if it's gotten totally out of hand, doing some pesticide applications, it's going to be more effective than really any bios on those larger areas. But in something like a clone dome, Persimilis will really clean those up super fast. And then another one that is just interesting to think about is Aphidius colmani, which is a parasitoid. So it's a wasp, and the parasitoid is a parasite that kills its host. And so that wasp will go and they feed off of aphids. So they'll go sting the aphid, and in doing so, they inject an egg. The egg hatches and eats the aphid from the inside out, and then a new wasp pops out. It was the organism that inspired the Alien movies. And so I think that one's really cool. There's a few other species of Aphidius that are currently in use for aphid control in cannabis as well. So yeah, I don't know. Just as far as control techniques, those are my favorite. And then as far as like on the cultural side, just botrytis has been a tough thing to deal with, especially in the greenhouse. And so we really got into doing these kind of early harvest manicure events where we take the top of the plants, and that's been really interesting because it's super counterintuitive. And some people on our team, when we first started doing that for botrytis control, really freaked out because they thought we were going to, really harm our yields. And what we found is that with most varieties, it's pretty static as far as yield, whether or not you manicure things. And with some, you actually get an increased yield because the bottoms of the plant have, that last week or so to kind of finish up and be a bit less larvae. And, we also kind of leverage that to start treating those tops of the plants differently from the bottoms. So, we give them a little extra love, and you end up with a little bit more of a high quality product there. And you also just avoid having any sort of bud mold development, which is something that pops up here and there for a lot of cultivators. And it just sucks because you've got these big, beautiful colas that are now ruined with mold, and you have to send them to extraction. And that's just awful.
Not ideal. Well, those are amazing tips. I had a question pop in my head as you were talking there too. Have you ever in all of your time seen a beneficial predator or beneficial organism appear in the greenhouse and you didn't know where it came from? Or have they always been introduced?
No, yeah, you do get things pop up. So the one that jumps to mind that will occasionally happen in Colorado that I think throws people a bit is the whirligig mite. That's the common name, but they're a naturally occurring predator mite that is a lot bigger than most of the mites that you'd see. They're still super tiny, but if you look them up, they're cool. They move really fast, and that's why people call them whirligig. But that was one that has given some people some pause because it's like, well, where did it come from? How did it get in here? And it's a mite, so that freaks people out. So that's something that's kind of popped up. And then I'm trying to think as far as like other beneficials. We've seen some other like incidental insects and things just kind of getting in there, but not really anything that I would say is like feeding off of the pests that we've got.
Got it. Okay, well, I have one final question for you, Dan. So at Ceres, we feel that the sun chamber that we've developed is one of the most exciting technologies available to growers out there. And for those that don't know what that is, we've basically united indoor growing precision with sun grown. So having a fully sealed greenhouse grow environment, and wondering, what does your dream grow look like through the prism of IPM and all of these factors that we're talking about, all the different variables and
Yeah,
concerns?
I think, well, first note, I'm really interested to hear a little bit more on the sun chamber thing. So we'll have to talk about that. I mean, I'm kind of envisioning, do you have mechanical cooling that's kind of supplementing what you're doing there? And then you've got so sort of like a warehouse greenhouse hybrid kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's called the Eco Loop, and it's a geothermal
Oh, okay.
HVAC.
So you guys are, yeah. So you're doing the geothermal thing there. Okay, yeah. We'll have to talk about that later. So really, really quick, I guess, like if you're thinking about things from an IPM standpoint, one of the things that would be really nice that we don't have in our current facilities is more compartmentalization, because all of these grows that we're dealing with here at the Lightshade side, whether by original design or just because that's how it ended up with the retrofit, we've got really big like cultivation flower areas where there are crops of mixed age in there. And so there's not the ability to harvest everything out and completely clean down the room and stop things from kind of jumping from one place to another. And so, one of the pests that pops up for us, especially seasonally, and is kind of a pain is the cannabis aphid. And so having crops of multiple ages in the same big space, that's tough because you can have aphid flyers jumping from something that's later to something that's earlier and kind of reinfesting. So it would be nice if we had, the ability to have like just distinct rooms. But there's a trade-off there too. For every wall that you're putting up, you're knocking down canopy space. So you've got to make sure to kind of balance those things. But yeah, I'm involved in a facility that is being designed and built by one of the owners in Puerto Rico, and we're doing a multi-tiered indoor situation there with distinct rooms for each of the flower areas. And so that has been kind of a cool operation because we're able to check that box on the IPM side. And then we've also been playing around with the vertical LED growing, which is something that a lot of folks have been messing around with. But as far as like a greenhouse and envisioning how that could be better, I think what you're talking about with fully enclosed and geothermal, kind of relying on that instead of the pad wall, that sounds great. I mean, that's really the thing that is kind of killing us is the pad wall, and that being the only means of kind of the ventilation system there. Just a big trade-off because you struggle with humidity and then you also struggle with holding CO2. And so that's been tough.
Yeah, two crucial factors to growing healthy
Yeah,
plants.
yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you again so much for your time, Dan. I learned a few things. I hope for all our listeners out there that you were able to benefit from this. Do you have any parting words to share with our audience out there?
I would say that there's always something to learn, no matter where you're at, and in this space especially because there's a lot of advancements happening, and there's a lot of an ability to kind of learn from each crop and refine your practices around it. So I would just say, always be looking for new opportunities to learn from things, and try to build systems where you generate data from what you're doing, and then you can analyze that data and then use that to kind of make the process better, and just work through a beneficial loop that way. So yeah, thank you so much for the invitation to discuss things, and happy growing out there.
Absolutely. Thanks again. This is Dan Banks from Lightshade, and I am Sunny Kaercher of Ceres Greenhouse Solutions.